So it seems to be that the trend today is that in one form or another parents are sharing custody.
So there's two forms of custody. There's legal custody, which has historically been shared, where both parents have equal say in making decisions about the health, welfare, safety, well-being of their children. The change that we're seeing in the last decade is that more and more parents are sharing equal or having a shared physical custody arrangement where they near an equal sharing of the time. And that's a definite change. I've been practicing for over 23 years, and there were very few equal shared custody cases when I started practicing as a young family law attorney. More and more often today we see literally a 50-50 sharing of the schedule, and there are a variety of different physical custody schedules that parents have, but the courts have totally become much more open to mothers and fathers having equal rights and equal amounts of time in parenting their children. And that's a definite shift in the culture for custody cases.
Is that true in cases where parents live across state lines as well?
It's much harder to share custody when you are separated geographically by a significant distance. And there are a number of cases as a result of the economy where one parent has to move or relocate their home for a job. So those cases don't really lend themselves to a 50-50 sharing or even a substantial kind of nearing 50-50 schedule. That would be a case where a much more traditional parenting plan would be necessary because of that geographic distance. It's just not feasible physically for children to go back and forth between two states or even at a significant geographic distance within the same state.
Is that also true in situations where maybe the mother lives in Philadelphia and the father lives in Cherry Hill? Or at that point, are the state lines not as important? State
lines are not as important in that scenario because you can get a child to and from school either across the bridge in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, or back into Center City, Philadelphia. So it's more about the distance than the state lines, but it certainly complicates things in terms of selection of the school district or which state should have the child registered for their schooling and going forward.
It also seems that there is a new approach for how the courts figure out who gets primary custody. Is that right? Something like attachment theory?
There is attachment theory. I'm not so sure that it's new, but the courts, it's really interesting. Their sensitivity to psychological issues kind of go in waves. And there's a current surge for mental health professionals that are involved in custody issues to weigh in on this issue of a child being attached to what they call a primary parental figure. Historically, that would have been the more traditional male-female role and not the male role. And there's a lot of pushing back as a result of that because just by virtue of biology, it is usually the mother who carries the child and has that biological connection, and more often we're seeing breastfeeding play a significant role in those arguments about the child is attached to me because they came from me, the child is attached to me because they nursed on my breast, the child is more attached to me because I'm the maternal figure. And that whole attachment theory is being used as a leg up oftentimes for why one parent should have the primary physical custodian role as opposed to a sharing or even a disproportionate amount, but one parent really having the primary caregiving role.
How about in cases where there is a same-sex couple?
Interesting question. More and more cases that we're seeing today involve same-sex couples raising children or having children together. And again, that same issue comes up as to whether they are attached to, now we're not talking about male-female differences, we're talking about which female in a same-sex relationship or which male in a same-sex relationship is more attached or is more the primary attachment figure. And again, there is a lot of research and there have been a lot of studies done, and the results are all over the board. Some people say that there definitely is a primary attachment figure. Others say, well, that may be true in terms of early on, it can be easily changed, and the other parent or the secondary attachment parent role can be just as important or equally as important as the primary.
What if the children are attached, multiple children in the same relationship are attached to different parents?
That kind of ties into something we talked about earlier, which is there's a preference not to separate siblings in a family. And this whole idea of family unity is very important to the courts. But I am seeing from my practice and experience today that when there are special needs, or from your question, a child that's more attached to one parent over the other, there can be some adjustments that make for some one-on-one time. But I don't think that just because a child is attached to one parent and the other is more attached to the other, they're going to separate the siblings today and keep them in separate households based on that primary physical kind of custody model. And again, there's a definite shift over the last 5 or 10 years to having a shared custody plan or parenting plan in place for both parents, whether it's a same-sex couple or a heterosexual couple that share a child or children.
The world seems to be getting smaller and smaller as technology brings us closer together than we've ever been before. What impact have you seen technology make on custody agreements?
It's a great question. I don't think the world's getting any smaller, but in terms of technology, we're all able to reach out to each other and have more interconnectedness than ever before. And that directly impacts the way parents can communicate and raise children together. I recently finished a case where one parent is in France and one parent is in Pennsylvania, and an integral part of the custody order that's been in place is scheduled time for Skype access. So not only would there be a telephone schedule, but today you're seeing more and more court orders that specify telephone contact, email contact, and Skype contact. So Skype and iChatting and other forms of connectedness through the internet allows for parents and their children, especially when there is a geographic distance, to spend more time with one another, face to face.
Good.
Okay?
Yep.